I'm the Chief Executive of the Cooperative Research Centres Association, and our board thought it was important to start a few bits of dialogue around, and this topic was the number one issue, was to talk about partnering through this current crisis. As you know, the first C in the CRCs is cooperative. Some people sometimes forget that it's not competitive or collaborative. It is actually cooperative. And we thought it was important to really find out what people are doing and get initial thoughts. No one has definitive answers to this, but I've asked two of the directors of the CRC Association, who both have a unique perspective, to lead the discussion. Professor Valerie Linton is the Executive Dean of Engineering at the University of Wollongong. She's also the former CEO of a very successful CRC, the Energy Pipeline CRC. She's got extensive academic as well as business experience. She's also relatively recently become a director of the Future Food Systems CRC, so she has a unique perspective on this. And again, I haven't asked Valerie to give us all the answers, but maybe really to raise some of the questions as much as anything of how we should be addressing this crisis in terms of our research partnering. Our second leader of the discussion is David Shooter. David's an engineer as well, and has had a successful career in the automotive sector, and he is currently the CEO of the Innovative Manufacturing CRC, a more recent CRC that is right in the midst of this crisis, as many Australian manufacturers try to adjust as quickly as they can. As I mentioned, both are directors of the CRC Association. In fact, Valerie is our deputy chair. I'd ask you all to remain on mute so that, unless you're speaking today, so that we don't necessarily hear your lawn mowing or dogs or Siri replying, as mine is just trying to do. In the Zoom thing, because it is a large number, there's over 30 of us online right now. If you have questions, just put them in the chat mechanism throughout, and then I'll address them towards the end. But we'll also ask some of you to raise those questions. And again, if you could tell us who you are and where you're from. I see most people are not putting their video on, conserving broadband there. And so I'll ask Valerie just to give her impressions of where are we up to. Has everyone just abandoned cooperation and gone into their bunkers, Valerie?
Thanks, Tony. Like Tony, you know, I sort of saying in the minute that whatever you thought at breakfast time is no longer current by lunch, and it's ancient history by dinner. So anyone making any sort of speculation in this current period it's a challenging thing to do. So with that spirit, and also that I don't represent all universities. I work for one university, but I have had, as Tony said, a long history with CRC's university and industries, and I'm a huge believer in CRCs and that cooperation that Tony talked about. And I think, you know, that is and has always been the strength of CRCs, that it brings a range of partners together to work together for the common betterment of all of them, and the sector that they're working within. And we shouldn't forget the government is part of that, because of course the government is the federal government, and in some cases state government and agencies are core members of many CRCs. People, if you're in CRC land, you're probably wondering what's happening in university land. Universities, of course, have a major role in teaching and education, and with students and the social distancing thing and everything that's happening, there's been a very strong pivot from all universities to move to online education. That doesn't mean to say that we're suddenly developing necessarily the full suite of online programs that you might imagine in that online space, but rather what more appropriately might be called remote teaching, where we're trying to do a version of what we would normally do in the classroom, but doing it over the internet with students using various technologies to engage with the learning. And of course, the lecturers and academic staff and tutors, etc., are on the other end of the screen, helping the students with their learning. So universities are making that happen. Most of them have taken a 1 or 2 week pause at some point just to help staff making the transition. So that's what's very much the focus of universities right at the moment, is delivering that for our undergraduate and postgraduate coursework students. But of course, the research part of it is as yet largely untouched. So whilst researchers can still come to university, so at our university, our researchers are still working in the lab, the PhD students are still working in the lab, and in any university is a large cohort of research-only staff who are still working away in the lab, working on their papers and everything. And universities are putting a lot of thinking into what happens if, should the federal government or state governments invoke the next level up of response to the coronavirus, COVID, where we're either in, well, let's take the extreme example, we're all locked down at home. Universities are putting a lot of thought about how we continue to do research, teaching, and all those other activities from homes. And of course, you can't take all of the lab home with you, but some labs can be operated remotely. But also researchers generate large amounts of data that they can take home, process from home, model, write up reports, papers, etc. So there is not an institution around the country that is not working flat out to deal with all of the challenges posed by the COVID-19 virus and minimize the impact on research and teaching. And really also just to keep our whole ecosystem of people who are involved with universities as honorees, as casuals, as staff, involved, engaged, and contributing very usefully to the work of the institution and the wider community nationally and internationally that they work within. That's probably enough of a bit of an intro.
I've got to do the mute thing. David, you're running a quite different CRC in that many of your partners are only small to medium enterprises that have probably seen their income drop to near zero or near zero in the last few weeks. How are they coping with participation in a CRC when they never envisaged anything remotely like this?
No, it's a good question, Tony, and not surprisingly, any CRC that has industry participants, either directly or indirectly, who are SMEs, are going to find they're impacted. We've had a number of calls from some of our industry project participants who are quite concerned and wanted to understand whether they can maybe be a bit more flexible around payments to the CRC, because we do have a lot of SMEs in our CRC. We invoice companies on a monthly basis anyway. So throughout that term, we've tried to, I guess, sensibly manage the demand on cash flow. But that stress has never been more apparent right now. The reality is that many of the universities, and Valerie talked about it, are going to be very keen to get projects continued, particularly from a research perspective. But as early as this week, on Monday, for example, we know universities have closed all their facilities, and every university seems to be in a different part of this journey, depending on the lockdown. And the reality is every single CRC is operated differently, different groups of stakeholders, and different types of projects. And so some CRCs may conduct research themselves. Others may see all of the research conducted at research organizations, and in other CRCs, there may be projects that are conducted out of industry or other locations, or even some international content. So there isn't a one size fits all in terms of the answers. I think what's concerning the SMEs, though, is that the financial capacity to keep paying is a real pressure point for them. And there's a couple of ways of dealing with that. They all came into the CRC projects with a view to investing in a new future for their businesses. And I sense that right now it's a really important thing for business leaders to do, to keep one eye on both the short game, but another eye on the long game. Because if we put all our efforts right now into working out what we need to do short term, all the levers we need to pull, we may make some big calls that potentially we might regret when you jump forward and coming out the other side of it. We don't know when we're going to come out the other side, but I think everyone's optimistic that this will be a position we return back to and projects can be continued. I think the other thing is that the SMEs that have been financially concerned, we've just said to them, look, you might find that the university research activities actually have to be slowed down, suspended, in some cases stopped. There's no doubt there's probably not a project that runs completely unfettered through this disruption anyway. And so rather than the SMEs jumping at the gun and saying, hey, we want to withdraw any participation or put ourselves on hold, our advice has been just weather the storm for a week or two more. We'll all be able to work together with all of the parties on a project and work out what's the right plan going forwards. So we're very hopeful that through this period, the business leaders and particularly the SMEs can keep one eye on exactly why they entered into investing and into a transformative project. That there's no better time and arguably no more important time to focus on new ideas, new business models, innovation and R&D. That was an incredibly salient lesson I learned as I helped run a business through the global financial crisis, where the criticality of keeping our key people in place, the key relationships, and actually being counter-cyclical and investing in R&D and innovation was what saw us rapidly accelerate out the other side of the GFC, well ahead of our competitors. It's all easy to say with hindsight. The reality is I absolutely feel for companies in the meantime. I think the other thing that we're also cognizant of, and this applies to potentially to CRCs as entities themselves, as small to medium businesses, is that the federal government and the state governments have a range of stimulus packages out there that broaden from payroll tax and so on. It's well worth every small and medium business actually understanding what those look like, and every CRC understands what it looks like, because again, people may be jumping the gun at pulling levers to reduce costs when actually there are mechanisms already in place they may not be aware of. So I guess our message has been very much stick to the game, stick to the race. We know there's going to be a bit of a timeout occurring, but our incentive and our complete modus operandi as a CRC team right now is to make sure that we ensure and insure, if we can, that all of our CRC projects are perhaps slowed down, suspended, whatever might need to be done in the meantime, but the game is still on, that these will all be resurrected and will all deliver fantastic outcomes at a point in time. As I said, none of us know quite what we're heading into, nor how long this will be, but we're very much trying to encourage people to keep one eye on the short game and one eye on the long game. So you've got a balanced view of life and where you're heading.
So, again. Oh, sorry, I was not muted anyway. David, have you had any overreactions? You sort of alluded to it there. I mean, where people have just got scared. I guess that's in an environment you work in manufacturing, and I know some of your partners have only recently been drawn to doing R&D. It's one of the successes of your CRC is attracting companies that wouldn't normally be working with a university, for example, into doing so. Have any of those look like they're panicking yet, or
No, I think, Tony, no, we're not seeing that actually. We're seeing some very measured questions, some very measured concerns. Everyone's concerned about their people. And I guess the smart business leaders will recognize that clearly there's a shift. You know, we're all working from home, but business carries on. It may be time consuming or quite wearying to spend a day in front of a web camera, but business can still continue and communication and collaboration can still happen. I think, you know, what I've learned through these crises is that really critical is to have purpose for people. And, you know, if for no other reason that projects need to continue, collaboration needs to happen, new conversations, new ideas need to be shared, is because it actually gives purpose for people. Now, whether those people are CRC employees, university researchers, whether they're industry people worrying about what's happening on the other side or whether they're going to get there, whether it's government employees, for example, I think having purpose right now is going to be critically important for everyone's, I guess, commitment to projects, but also their mental and general well-being in the meantime. Things will change, but things will also come back together on the other side. We just don't know when. And I think the important thing is working out what is certain and what's uncertain. All of our project participants are getting a lot out of their involvement in C. I'm sure that's the case across CRCPs, for example. These are big investments that companies make. And these are big projects that universities and the CSIRO undertake with their companies. And so to me, it's just finding a way to stay the course. We're not seeing any panic. We're seeing, as I said, measured, risk managed companies. But I have to say, for a company to be involved in a CRC, you're probably dealing already with those types of companies that have that type of leadership anyway. So perhaps we're not seeing what might be happening elsewhere more broadly in industry, because I think those that collaborate with CRCs and universities they have a certain type of DNA and motivation and ambition anyway.
Valerie, I'll put the same question to you from the University of Wollongong's point of view. Have you had to reach the point with any of your companies you're working with, to your knowledge, where the universities had to say, hey, we can't perform this research at the moment, or have you had any companies just saying, stop, we can't afford it?
Not that I'm aware of. Just pondering. No, I think universities, and again, just remember, I'm only speaking on behalf of my own university, I'm not even speaking on behalf of my own university. I'm just giving my own views. This does not represent any university in particular, but I think for the sector generally, universities, as I alluded to earlier, are trying to do their best to support the communities they work in as well, and the students, and universities are big employers, and they're trying to do their very best. I think some research partners, as David said, are keen to press ahead. They're trying to be counter-cyclic. They're trying to think about, well, what's the opportunities when this is all over, and how do we power up for that? The other part is that universities, of course, are very much powering up in the COVID era to anybody who's got research in that area. You can be sure that there's 100%, more than 100% effort behind trying to find ways around this virus and fix up the cure, but also to support people in our health services achieving all the things they need to do. So universities are pretty good at pivoting to support strategically what's important at that time. And I think they do feel that need to, to be a steadying kind of organisation in communities where we keep going. And the universities have been around for hundreds of years, and I think most universities would intend to be around in hundreds of years to come. So we're not intending to do any, the sector generally is not intending to do any major lurches or harm the people that we work with. And I think there is definitely underlying opportunities. And, as David said, we may all be shut down for some period of time. And I think the creative thing is to figure out how we can all continue to work, bring innovation, etc. During that time, and that we don't have to wait till we come out the other side of it to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. I do have another hat on that I chair the Pork Research, Australasian Pork Research Institute. My own background there, and of course, if you're with livestock, we don't get used to pandemics, but we experience them, and we were experiencing already the worst ever in African swine fever, with about 40% of the world's pigs dying in the last 12 months from the disease, a huge mortality rate. And one of the things we've said as a research body is our income is actually quite steady from because it's largely based on levies and memberships through. So we've said we better go out to our research partners and assure them that we will be continuing with our research, and if anything, maybe spending a bit more this year than we did last year. And I think it's important that those that are in a position to say that actually do, because we're not reliant on sort of month-to-month things, but it's more of an annual cycle. And so we're trying to make sure that our research partners understand that as well. So it might be a useful thing for some of the CRCs to, if they are in a position to assure their partners that they can do, that they're open. In fact, Paula has just made that a somewhat similar comment. Paula, maybe if you come off mute and talk to that. Paula's from Frontier SI, which took over the work of the Spatial Information CRC.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, probably about 3 weeks ago, Frontier SI went to a work from home policy, and we started to think about some of these challenges quite early, and we were worried, as everyone is, about what the implications are for our partners. So we sort of ran through a bit of a brainstorming session to understand what their challenges are going to be, and then tried to look at ways that we might be able to help address some of those things. And obviously with our industry partners, one of the issues was, we were concerned that, and they are, needing to put people, not put them down, stand people down and reduce FTE. So, and then we've got some government partners who, because of the requirements on them, we've got, WA Department of Health and some of the health departments where their needs are growing and they just can't resource. So by putting mechanisms in place where we can do easy secondments and move people around, using us as the mechanism is one way. And another thing that we've heard from our university partners is they're looking to quickly put together online resources. And so again, it's something that we've been able to facilitate, doing joint webinars for letting people get their continued education points from that point of view. So there's a few things that were just taken on to try and assist. Another example, I suppose, would be just having those mechanisms to facilitate, continue those engagement processes rather than just stop it all together. So let's put some mechanisms together to have those discussions and formulate ideas and keep the pipeline growing.
I think that's great, Paula, and I think there are actually many CRCs that are going through a similar process. So, I commend Tony and their CRCA, because these sort of webinars might be a really good way to share better and best practice examples of what people are doing around the traps. Each CRC, as I said earlier, we all know we operate differently. However, we all have very similar legal transactional structures. We operate under the same fundamental agreement from the Commonwealth. We operate typically under similar terms and conditions for our projects. And so I guess we're probably all looking at what does this mean if parties aren't able to continue. I think that one of the key things that we're conscious of is that if you look around the country, one of the biggest challenges we have with businesses being stressed is mass unemployment. And it's going to be one of the saddest and probably longest term impact, that even when everyone is through this other side, rebuilding those cafes and restaurants and bars. The one thing we don't know yet inside the myriad of projects that CRCs and universities have is whether there is a risk of people being employed at any level in industry, in CRCs, in government, in universities, whether their contracts of employment are specific to a project. And if that project is suspended, for example, for a period of time, what happens to those individuals? And then how do you turn the resource factor back on at the other end? I think it's an easy thing to focus on things like cash and access to facilities and so on. I'm really conscious that all of us need to be working together to make sure that the human resources, the people, are all there, engaged as far as they can be throughout, but are all there on the other side as well. And I think that's going to have to be a collaborative process, because nobody knows quite how long this process might take to get back to a state of normal. So, I think we're rightfully concerned about the well-being of our teams, companies involved, universities, and CRCs. We can't forget the CRCs ourselves are small to medium-sized organisations, And most of the people we collaborate with are enormous universities and enormous state and federal governments. And so for us to pull the levers there is not easy. But I think the role we can play is really as a collaborative partner and focus on what really matters in research and make sure that is kept intact one way or another through to the other side.
So many of you people in your position, David, running a CRC, it's not the most urgent thing for a university necessarily to be talking to you at the moment, as they've had to shift, keep their own staff and shift their whole business model online and all sorts of things. What are the best interactions you're having at this time that have been added the most value, if you like, and what would you like to see others if they haven't yet been able to talk to you?
Yeah, I think I'm conscious that as a CRC, we are probably all bugging all the universities right now, asking very similar questions. Are you closing? Are you staying open? Have you got people working from home? But a collective response from a university actually doesn't really answer that question, because every lab, every faculty, every project will be a little bit different. And a lot of our projects are collaboratively done out in industry locations. So, a robotics project may well be out at a company factory, and the academics and the researchers are doing that work out in industry. So that there's a myriad of, across many CRCs, of many different ways to do research. There's no one answer, but I think there are two areas where it would be really sensible to pool knowledge. One may be taken care of very quickly if the states do go into a lockdown and universities as institutions are required to be closed. That could be a very simple one. And then it's just a question on the projects, what can happen in a working from home environment. But a collective knowledge around which universities are in which state of closure, access to facilities, working from home, and so on. Hopefully not tackling whether universities are looking at which employees are on contract versus permanent. I know that's a very natural thing for everyone to be doing right now. But I think the key thing is continuity of the commitments that have been made. The other one I think is, so sharing knowledge about where the universities are would be really good, because I think there's a lot of noise in the system with all the CRCs trying to establish the same bit of information. And the other one, Tony, is around the link with the Commonwealth Government and the department. I'm conscious that we will all be responding and trying to set up meetings and dealing separately. There's potentially a more coordinated way to do that, because a lot of the issues, once they're filtered, will be very similar, I think, in terms of are we going to hit Commonwealth milestones? If not, what about annual reporting? Does that mean Commonwealth continues paying the CRCs in the meantime if they are not hitting milestones? Do we all have to go through variations? What happens to CRCs that are in their later terms of life? Will the guidelines be flexible to allow extensions or extended wind-up periods to make sure the CRCs can deliver on what they're meant to be delivering? So I think there's two avenues there that consolidation of information and sharing might be really useful. And I think the association can certainly play a role in that, although the CRCs do operate each a bit differently. So look, apologies to the universities, because we're probably bugging you all, but I think somehow if we could get a consolidated list of the status at a macro level, that would be really helpful for everybody.
All right, well, we might try and do that. Just by way of sharing that information, there's a lot been happening this week. So we've had a board meeting of the association earlier today, and I've reported to the board. So I think sharing this information would be fairly useful to people if they don't know it. Of the round 8 CRC projects, there were 24 offers made. 23 of them were accepted, 1 was rejected. And contracts are out for all 23. So we congratulate and thank the departmental staff for getting on with that. So that's fast tracking. So it's really up to them. As soon as they get their contracts back, they will be paid. Round 9 of the CRC projects sub-program closed at 5 p.m. last night. I know I was doing clinics up until 20 to 4, and I suggested I better get off the phone so they could implement any of the changes that we've been discussing. And I'm assured that the department will try to process round 9. They've got to go now to the committee as quickly as possible. So there's a desire from the federal government to see that money out in the economy and with you guys, not sitting in government coffers. Round 21 of the CRCs, these are the 5 that have just been announced. I think they finished announcing the 5 of them last week. Obviously, pulling together the CRC contract at the moment is really difficult. Rounds 19 and 20 took some considerable time. It takes up to about 9 months to pull these agreements together, remembering some of them are in the order of $200 and $300 million these days. So round 21, we get together after this conference with those 5 CRC or intended CRCs to talk about a common approach back to the Commonwealth. And again, the Commonwealth has asked them, what do we need to do to facilitate you getting your contracts in place as quickly as possible? So I anticipate, and I'm jumping the gun here, but I anticipate that the Commonwealth will lower its requirement on the CRC syndicate for the amount of money they need to have signed up before the Commonwealth executes the agreement. And that will help those round 21 5 CRCs to maintain their momentum, which is really important at this time. We don't want to see those ones which were only finished being named last week. The thing that gets momentum going in the CRC is the projects, and if you have a very long lag phase to get the contract written up, it gets harder and harder as people don't see the real action of the CRC. So the Commonwealth, again, the CRC program staff have been extremely proactive and helpful there. Some of you will be wondering about round 22, which is the coming round of the CRCs. We're discussing this, the association's discussing this with the Commonwealth, and we don't have a definitive answer as yet. But the most likely scenario is that the deadline for stage 1 will be delayed, not by very much, because some CRCs some bids are ready to go. They've been working on their bids for 2 years and don't have a problem to get it in. That's only a few of them, I might add. We know of at least 17 bids that are active at the moment. And so the whole process is likely to just be delayed by a month or 2. But don't assume it will be delayed by very much. Be ready to act when the bidding website opens. There have been proposals from University of Queensland in particular has asked us to put to the Commonwealth, and we have, that the requirement on sign up of participants at stage 1 be lowered. I would not bank on that happening. And my feeling is that won't happen because that would actually mean a change in the guidelines. The guidelines are a regulation under legislation that the minister has to sign off on. Quite a big deal to change the guidelines. It's much less of a big deal to change the deadlines. That's much more up to the department when things open and close. And so if you are looking to bid in round 22, I would concentrate on getting your bidders ready and lined up for probably end of July deadline for stage 1. Hopefully we'll know more about that next week. Now, I don't know whether you have no questions or you just haven't been typing them into the Zoom group chat, or you haven't realised that. But if there are questions, now's a good time to throw it open. As I said, no one has an answer on this, so if you've got a suggestion or the best way for partnerships to continue during this difficult time, feel free to tell us what your suggestion is.
Yeah, while we wait, Tony, I might just comment on David's question about universities. Can you find out what state universities are at? And I think that's an ever-moving feast, because we were doing a bit of social distancing, and then suddenly we had to have only 4 people, so 1 person for every 4 square meters, and then so it's a sliding scale, and that everybody having to be 1.5 meters apart allows certain operations to carry on. And then if you say, well, suddenly you can only have 1 person for every 4 square meters, then that shuts down some things that were open before. So I think it would be very hard for, I suppose I'm saving Tony a job here, it would be very hard for us to get an accurate state of the state of play with every university around the country that would be valid for very much longer than a few hours, because of that ever-changing nature as we react to things. And a lot of universities, like other people, are allowing some staff to work from home, etc. But I think the other way to come at it is that universities are, I think, keen to keep up the work with their partners, and lab by lab it's quite different. Some labs, it doesn't matter if they shut down for a bit. Some labs, they will keep going till the bitter end before they'll shut those labs. So I think if you do have university partners, the thing to do would be, because if you go to the DVCR as the person leading research in that university, you may get a different answer compared to, you'll get the generic answer. Whereas if you talk to your program leads, etc., within their university and ask them what's happening, and if you do want an update, just say to them, well, what's the current state? Let us know when it changes. And I think your industry partners would be very happy to do that for you, because the CRCs are important to universities, and there are some universities that have concentrations of CRCs, so even there they may be doing different things with different CRCs depending what kind of CRC it is. But I think go to your program leads within universities, get them to give you a view, and then let you know when things change.
I was the one that put a question there. One of the ones that concerns me is postgraduates within the CRC. Sometimes they're separate to the large postgraduate groupings in a university. How are people handling their own postgraduates at this time? Obviously they have to keep going, but they may not even be able to work from home. Some of them, I'm not sure.
Well, I'll speak to my own experience, and hopefully this is fairly universal, that we try to make it possible for postgraduate researchers to work from home. Of course, often postgraduate students live in share houses, they have all sorts of other distractions going on, but we try to make sure that every postgraduate student has the ability to, for example, that they can take a computer home to work on. Some of them have laptops, some of them have desktops. They can take that computer home to continue their work. Many universities are like, well, we certainly do. You can tap in through the VPN back into the databases within the university, so that you're not having, and often you can do the calculations and do everything you can, all those big things within the university on their IT system. You're not having to download heaps of data across the network, etc. So I know certainly in my own university, and I'm sure it's true elsewhere, that people have put a great deal of thought about chasing every little rabbit hole down to the detail to make sure that people can do the best they can, and to facilitate that. But I think in CRC projects, it would be worthwhile considering that, particularly if you've got lab-based or experimental-based work, wherever that be, whether that be at a company or within a university, that you think about the plan B, the plan C, for 3 months, 6 months, a year. What would you do instead? Because if we were all at home for 2 months, let's say, it might be a really good chance to get those students to write up those papers that you've been nagging them to write for ages, and they just never somehow get around to. Or can they take a data set home? But I think keeping in touch with students is the other really important thing. And it'd be quite nice, I think, not only for the supervisors to keep in touch with the students, which they will be doing, but very nice for CRCs themselves to create perhaps virtual networks for all of the PhD students within a CRC, and even from the CRC management to those students, that they still feel connected, because connection is a thing that gets you eventually when you're working at home. There are very few people who are sufficiently self-motivated to work in a little bubble and stay sane. So, you know, that ability to talk about their work, but also to keep the water cooler style conversations going, whatever it is that students talk about, I think will also help people keep that sense of isolation at bay and keep motivated. And David talks about, you know, people needing a purpose. It's those sorts of things that often give you the ability to keep going when your research leadership says, you know, we're really looking forward to seeing your results in this space, and this is how it makes a difference, and how are you going and how are you feeling, and, you know, creating those little social interactions as well. We've got to never forget that we're social people.
Well, it's long been my practice to lock my postgraduates up and only feed them on the flatbread and dinner mint diet. You know, that they have to send out a papers under the door, and then you can slide in a bit of flatbread under, and when the references come out, you give them an after dinner mint and tell them to get on with the next one. But that might be why I'm no longer a professor at a university, Valerie. Right, no one has their hands up. It sounds like everyone's on board that we be as cooperative as humanly possible at the moment. I suppose we don't have a problem if this goes for 3 weeks. If it goes for 3 months, we're starting to see some cracks, but this has been a good effort to try and keep the dialogue going and keep all channels of communication open, so that if there are issues that come up, that we can resolve them. Next week we're going to hold another. Yep. Thank you, Melissa. That's I'm glad it's been helpful to you. You see on your screen Rachel Falk, who's the Chief Executive of the Cybersecurity CRC. She's going to talk to us next week about issues related to cybersecurity and keeping things secure from your home. Many of us have suddenly had to open up networks that were not accessed from lots of different places to suddenly they are. And so Rachel will speak to those issues. And there's some comments coming in now. Yes, so I agree, Craig. It may well be too early at the moment to tell, and we're going to have to keep on things. But so far, the message is pretty positive. We're meeting on a Friday today. Next week's meeting is on the Thursday. We're making these meetings as open as possible. Everyone's welcome, whether you're a member or a non-member of the CRC Association. It's in our interest for everyone to keep talking through this really difficult time, which we will come through. Just a matter of how long it takes. Please thank Valerie Linton and David Shooter for leading our discussion today. Jordan Gardner in my office and Amelia in my office have pulled it together again from their homes. From my board meeting today, they asked could I organise a photo of their workstations so that we can judge whether they're safe. I can assure my board members that my workers' workstations are certainly neater than the boss's. And so I'm going to spend a half hour cleaning up mine today. Maybe that's just because I asked for a photo. Anyway, stay safe, everyone. Keep the distancing going. Don't let it get you down. And thanks for joining us today. And